Okay, so we'll get started. Thank you for joining us for another installation of the AWP Conference free AWP webinar series. If you've been following the series, you're aware that what we're doing is giving you some preview content and opportunities to ask questions and chat with some of the speakers and panelists that we're going to be featuring at the conference this year. The conference is October 2nd and 3rd in Houston, Texas, and we look forward to seeing you there. Hopefully you enjoyed today's webinar. It's a little shorter. We've been doing 1-hour webinars to date, but this will be our first 30-minute webinar, so we look forward to your feedback to let us know what you thought after the webinar. Today's webinar is based on a presentation that will be on the main stage on day 2 of the conference called Creating Your Own AWP Playbook. And we'll get a little into that a little bit more shortly, but first I'll give you a little bit of overview about the conference if you're new to it. The conference started as the Workplace Planning Conference back in 2009, and it was an Alberta-based conference, and since 2014 has been in Houston, Texas as the AWP Conference. The conference is going global in 2019. We're actually returning to, we have plans to return to Alberta in 2019 for the first time since 2013, and we're going to be in London, England in 2019 as well, and full details about both of those events will be available at awpconference.com, and we'll send email updates and things of that nature as well. So for the past couple of years now, we've also engaged an AWP Conference Advisory Committee, which is a panel of subject matter experts from owner companies, EPC companies, contractor companies that have an interest and knowledge and experience in AWP, and they've been helping us develop the program and the format and the themes for the conference, and just like to acknowledge them. You can check out the full roster at awpconference.com, and the individuals online today are also members of that advisory committee. So, speaking of the individuals online today, our panelists are Glen Warren, and he'll be acting as the facilitator. He's the chair of the COAA AWP committee. You can reach him at the email address there. For Southern Company, we have Justin Weaver, construction manager. His email address is there as well. And Dr. Amer Searcy from Consolidated Contractors Company. He's the group manager for learning and innovation. And you can feel free to reach out to Amer with any specific questions you have about his content as well. The conference theme. So the overall theme that the AWP Conference Advisory Committee came up with is developing an AWP organization. What's your AWP playbook? So we want to help the attendees learn more about how they can structure their organization and kind of set up their projects for success from an AWP standpoint. And they're going to be tackling that large, very complex topic by diving into some more specific areas that are kind of key to that. Specifically, we'll be talking about AWP scalability. That's actually a project that's been underway for a couple of years through the Construction Owners Association of Alberta. You can learn about the documents and publications and tools that they've been developing. We're going to be looking at the cultural change required to make AWP work organizationally and on the projects. We'll have a special session focused on AWP technologies. That's actually an annual event. We have a technology panel each year. And we'll also be looking at procurement, which is going to go beyond just materials management. And that's a very big topic that a lot of people have been asking for more information about. So we're looking forward to that. We'll talk about how to measure your successes in AWP. What kind of indicators to look for and how to track them. And finally, what we're talking about today a little bit is creating your own AWP playbook. So kind of wrapping all of those other topics together and talking about how to kind of bring it together and make a process that'll work for you and your company. The description for the presentation, creating your AWP playbook, companies experienced in AWP implementation. Both owners and EPCs will talk about their own AWP programs to help give new entrants an idea of how to walk away and build their own AWP playbook. In an inclusive format, they will discuss how their respective playbooks address people, process, technology, desired outcomes, typical barriers, and other lessons learned. So it's a great opportunity to hear from companies that have been doing this, have their own take on it, their own approach, and ask some questions and start doing some thinking about how your playbook might look, or how you can, maybe make some changes to what you're working on currently. Dow Chemical Company will be on stage with Southern, with CCC, and COAA. Unfortunately, they send their regrets. They were going to be online today, but due to circumstances outside of their control, the panelist was unable to attend. So you can meet him at the conference in October. So without further ado, we'll jump into the webinar today. We're just going to be talking about a very limited aspect of the AWP playbook conversation, which is what exactly is an AWP playbook? How do we define that? And we'll be getting perspectives from COAA, Southern, and CCC, and hopefully have a chance for you to ask some questions yourself. Like I said, we'll be doing this for about 30 minutes. If we go a little bit long, that's okay. Hopefully you can stick around, but we'll get going right now. So what is an AWP playbook? Let's throw it over to our facilitator, Glen Warren.
Okay, good morning. Excuse me, it could be good afternoon or good evening. When you have these webinars, people can be from all over the world. So anyway, on behalf of COAA, I'm very pleased to be able to provide a very high level narrative on what is an AWP playbook for today's webinar. So I'd like to start by providing a little bit of a background on AWP. I was the co-chair of the original COAA CII research team that developed and published IR 272, which ultimately became the baseline starting point for industry in developing advanced work packaging for their projects. A key point is that the team developed guidelines as to what should be included in AWP and why it was required. But I must point out that we realized that there were some things that we didn't explain really well. For example, how procurement fits into AWP and the importance of data to support AWP. But IR 272 has stood the test of the first few years of organizations and projects using it as a guideline, and have not meant that they didn't have to start their programs from scratch. So as organizations and projects started developing their own specific AWP processes and procedures, it was clear that IR 272 provided a lot of the what is needed in AWP programs, but did not define or provide guidance for things like how each organization or project would develop their programs, who within any specific organization was responsible for the development or signing off on deliverables such as AWP procedures, and when the actual deliverables were required within the project lifecycle to make their AWP implementation a success. Thus, we come to what we consider the AWP playbook, which in general terms, for lack of it, maybe a general definition, is the how, who, and when an organization or project needs to define their deliverables for their specific AWP implementation project or program. It should also be pointed out that COAA is finding that there are perhaps more than one AWP playbook required for any specific organization or project. For example, there can be a significant difference in what is required for an AWP playbook required in the activities in the front-end planning and design of a project compared to what is required during the actual construction execution of that project. As such, an organization may have two completely different playbooks depending on their roles during the front end or their roles during the execution of the construction. There's also the realization that some owners will be very prescriptive as to how they expect their project partners to execute an AWP implementation. And as such, the partners would probably have to modify their corporate AWP playbook to meet the expectations of the owner for that specific project. Other owners may just provide clear expectations of the AWP implementation and then allow their partners to explain how they will meet these expectations. The partners then expect to be audited during the project to ensure they indeed are doing what they said they would. Could you hit the next slide there, please, Steve? I wanted to provide some examples of perhaps what deliverables would be included within AWP playbooks with a brief explanation. The examples I provide are just a sampling of what we'll also discuss during the plenary session at the AWP conference. First of all, you're going to have various AWP procedures that may be completely new to an organization, or they may be existing procedures that have to be modified specifically to address the AWP implementation. One of the things we found, you need a very robust material readiness assessment procedure to provide clear indications of the availability of all your material and engineered equipment required for any specific CWP. Also, we found don't have a lot of definition or processes around an engineering work package readiness assessment procedure to accurately determine the readiness of any specific EWP to meet the project baseline schedule. A lot of engineering companies have great ways of progressing individual deliverables within EWP, but they're struggling with how to assess the readiness of the full EWP. Next, the database procedure needs to be developed that clearly provides the necessary AWP data attributes that have to be tracked, and also clear directions as to who is responsible for the input of these data attributes, the reporting cycle for the input of these data attributes, and the procedure must clearly indicate the format and content of the inputs expected. Next, we go to a material management plan that has to be modified to meet AWP expectations, including the material readiness assessment for any specific CWP. This could include, but not be limited to, having each purchase order and each line item of that purchase order tagged to an attribute to allow the material readiness assessment. And the purchase orders have to clearly address vendor data requirements, and especially timing of the vendor data for engineering discipline design requirements. Expediting information to address each PO line item, and logistics to address each PO line item, the receiving and warehousing reports produced for any specific CWP, and finally the bagging and tagging reported at any level to be able to allow you to find out where you are with your CWP material. Another one is an AWP maturity assessment procedure. That would include how a project or an owner would look at their prospective partners for the project and how they would assess them. Some of those things that they would look at is their RFQ process, which would include a specific AWP assessment section, and an auditing procedure during the project to ensure the AWP implementation is being followed. So that's just a sampling of some of the things that we'd be looking at. We're probably going to expand that at the AWP conference, as we'll have more time than what we've allocated for today. So I thank you for attending, and look forward to addressing any of your questions in the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So I'll pass it now to Justin Weaver.
All right, so Glenn, I definitely appreciate everything you've set up for me here. So just a brief history of our AWP journey at Southern Company. We've been working on this for the past 3 years in piloting AWP and growing AWP across multiple projects and multiple sites. And our big focus this year has been developing our own playbook and publishing that playbook so it can be used by the organization at large. And so we are actually in the process of building our playbook. And so this topic of what is an AWP playbook is very, very important to us, and I think very important to anybody who is willing or looking to adopt advanced work packaging as a best practice within their own organization. So what I want to share with you today is our approach at Southern Company to building our playbook. And so what we want to do, like Glenn said, the playbook we feel needs to address what needs to be done, who needs to do it, and at what point during the project does that need to be done. And so we start off with an overarching guideline or a one-page document that anybody can pick up and read and understand. And that one-page document is the jumping off point for every procedure that gets developed beyond the one-pager. So what you're looking at on the screen is that one-pager. This tells you what needs to happen, who needs to do it, and when they need to do it. So we start off, because AWP covers every function on a project and every part of the timeline of a project, we want to make sure that we're pretty explicit about capturing everything that needs to happen and when it needs to happen and who needs to do it. So one other unique thing about Southern Company, I think this is also probably true for Dow, is that Southern Company is an owner, but we have a rather large in-house EPCM organization. So we happen to do a lot of the in-house engineering, we do the procurement, we do the construction management, and we manage contractors who would then take our deliverables and perform work phase planning. So let me just step through this one pager of what we use as our guiding document for our playbook. So in project planning, we want to do interactive project planning and produce lists of construction work areas, construction work packages, engineering work packages, labor work packages, which is something that is not in the CII documentation, but this is essentially what we're referring to as our contracting strategy for a project. Then there's procurement work packages and turnover packages. So we want to plan out what all of these packages are going to be during our scope development or during our pre-feed project stage. Within project controls, we want to make sure that these lists of packages are reflected and tracked in the project scope, schedule, and budget. And this also happens during the feed or front-end loading phases of the project. In the engineering group, we're stating that the engineering team is responsible for developing and releasing engineering work packages. And this happens during detailed engineering. And the same thing goes for procurement. The engineering team is responsible for developing and releasing procurement work packages. In construction management, the construction management team develops and releases construction work packages as part of a labor contract during the bid process, or they release construction work packages after the contract has been executed as an extra work order. And this can happen during detailed engineering and procurement or during construction startup and closeout. So this is more during the execution phase of a project. For contracting, the construction management team and our own internal contract strategy group develops and releases our labor packages, and this happens during execution as well. Our startup teams are responsible for developing and releasing turnover packages, and this happens during execution. And then towards the end of our project, our construction management and startup teams manage client acceptance of turnover packages and close them out using a structured punch list process. And this happens at the very end of the project. So that's our approach. We want to put this on one page so that anybody who has not heard of AWP can just pick up the document and say, oh, this is what it means. This is what it means to do AWP. And so our whole playbook of resulting guidelines and procedures that give more detail about what to do and when to do it are born out of this overarching document. So that's our approach at Southern Company to developing our playbook. And I would love to turn it over to Dr. Amber Searcy for CCC's approach.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Amber Searcy. I work for CCC. CCC is a general contractor based in Athens, Greece, and we work in the Middle East and as well as the CIS countries. My role in the company has been for 23 years. My role has been in implementing project management solutions My background is civil engineering, but I've been working mainly with mechanical projects and working with clients like ExxonMobil, Shell, and similar oil and gas large organizations. Being a construction company, we are always in the, typically being late involved in the process. Our experience in AWP started about 7 years ago, and we have about, I would say, completed 3 projects implementing the approach, and now we are running 2 projects currently where we have a AWP process ongoing. Now, typically the clients, like Glen said, we had experience with clients who get us involved and say, okay, well, you are my only EPC contractor, our contractor. This is my process, but I'm open to listen to your ideas and processes and see, maybe I adopt yours. And we had a situation with one of the major companies. They said, okay, well, okay, we are, we'll follow your approach, which is slightly different than, let's say, our internal, but as long as you meet our overall objectives, we're fine. And we have situations where the client said, no, you are part of a group of contractors, and this is our playbook in details. You have to follow it. You have to use our tool, and so on. So we have to be, as a contractor, adaptive to work with in both scenarios. And sometimes the client have an engineering company, EPC company, who are fully aware of the AWP, but many cases the engineering company are new to the process, or so we have to work together in building the awareness about the process and the benefits for all parties. One of the things that is very important for us was how to build internally, understand the processes and of AWP, and understanding what's the need for a dedicated team to work this. Especially most of our projects are lump sum projects. So in some cases, the client does understand that we need extra money for deploy these resources to achieve better productivity. But in some cases, the client is not does not have this let's say full understanding. So we have to see a way to absorb this cost. Now, usually we have to have dedicated planners and dedicated what we call technicians to run the software. Now, the first thing we did in the company was establishing within our knowledge management program in the company a dedicated community of practice to this approach to AWP. So through this process, we started first, by gathering people who read, understand the process, being involved, attended past conferences of ASI Group and AWP conferences. So we started with an awareness campaign to make people aware about the process. Why is it different than, let's say, lean or our traditional project control processes? What is the benefit for CCC in this process and for the owner? And this took some time with presentations and learning material. And through the projects that we worked on, we developed a lot of guidelines covering. Of course, our main focus is on the IWPs. Sometimes clients say, okay, well, these are my CWPs, and I would like you as contractor to do a review at the beginning of the construction phase when we get involved, to maybe we can adjust some of these CWPs. And often we do have a situation where we have to adjust the CWPs because unfortunately some of the people don't really understand fully the details of the construction process when they develop the CWPs. Now, we try with clients to get the contractor early on, but not necessarily this always successful. So most of our guidelines is focused on the IWPs. What's the role of the project manager? What's the role of the control group? What's the role of the AWP planners? What's the role of the technicians, the document controllers, the material warehousing? All the different groups. What are the required information, and what's the workflows, the different workflows that we need to follow, from reviewing the IWPs to building the reviewing the CWPs, building the IWPs, the review cycle, the handover from the AWP planners to the construction site, how to deal with situations where you have unforeseen conditions, different forms, different templates. And and we have a special guidelines for our own software that we developed in-house, how to use the software and integrate it with the different, because it's, one of the challenges with AWP that you have a lot of information has to be really, connected. It's a challenge, but also a great benefit to be able to connect, the various project information together in one database and to be able to view them. And in our knowledge portal, we share lessons learned and case studies and useful KPIs, like, for example, what number of AWP planners you need per type of, CWP, the expected number of IWPs, all these measures, the typical man-hour, scope, and so on. So that's some of the things we will try during the conference to go through that, and I will share with some examples and how we, and some of the workflows we deploy in our company. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amr. So we're now in the Q&A period. We have run a little bit long. I apologize to the attendees, and I do thank you for your patience. This is our first time, as mentioned at the start of the webinar, in a more condensed format. And this is obviously a very deep topic that we'll have an opportunity to get much more detailed about at the conference. So we will go ahead with the questions. We'll take a few minutes. We have 2 questions to pose to our panelists, and then for those of you still online, we will pass it over to you for any additional questions or comments. And thanks again for sticking around. So let's get started. Question 1, should an owner have a project-specific AWP playbook that contractors have to follow, or should they provide guidance to the project partners of what their AWP expectations are, and then leave it to the partners to indicate how they will execute to meet those expectations? Let's get the COAA perspective first with Glen.
Maybe this is my own personal opinion, maybe more so than COAA, but my firm belief is that I think that the owner should be less prescriptive and put more time into defining what they see, or explain what is their definition of a successful AWP implementation, and what their expectations are of their contractors. So I lean more to having the owner allow the contractors to explain and provide a program that's going to meet their expectations.
Okay, great. And Justin, what would your response to this be?
Yeah, I would align myself with Glenn there. I err on the side of not being too prescriptive with contractors. We want to make sure that we're hiring contractors that are that have their own processes in place that make them successful. So we really want to leave it to providing an expectation of what we want the outputs to be, but to follow and make sure that the contractors have their own programs for doing that. So like Amr was saying, they are more focused on taking CWPs and creating IWPs from them, and they should have processes that really dictate how they expect to do that, because they have their own organizational structure and they have their own people with their own titles. So in our contracts, what we want to do is just specify what the outputs are going to be. If we're going to be the ones handing over CWPs to a contractor and we expect them to break those down into IWPs, then we'll have a contract. We'll have contract language that states that. Or if we're hiring an EPC, our general guidance in that EPC contract will be, we want you to use AWP, and it's gotta have these certain expectations, kind of like what our one-pager was that I just showed. But beyond that, we're not going to be prescriptive on the exact steps they need to follow.
Great, thank you. And Amr.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Glenn mentioned and Justin, that leave it to the contractor, but I emphasize that the owner involved, yes, leave it to the contractor to do, propose his processes, and as long as he works within your expectations. But I stress on the need for owner, stress on his involvement in the process. This does not mean that the client or the owner pulls out. The owner has to be in the middle of all the meetings, push for EWPs, push for the procurement. So it doesn't mean that the owner leaves to the contractor that okay, I'm leaving. No, he has to still be very involved in the process and take leadership.
Excellent. Question 2, how can an owner determine the maturity of a potential project partner's AWP playbook? Alternately, how can a contractor provide assurance to an owner of their maturity? Glenn.
This is an interesting question because, to begin with, very few companies have a very mature process yet for their AWP playbook. This is very new. So in a lot of cases, I think it's going to be how well they can explain where they are, how their processes work, how their project organization is aligned to the playbook, and ultimately it'll be an audit of how they do. One of the things I've seen some owners do is they have a very well-developed method of assessing the responses to their RFQs of their prospective partners. So you have to ask a lot of questions about their AWP process procedures, their people, their experience, and then have a good way of scoring them to give you a good indication.
Excellent. Justin.
Yeah, I would echo Glenn again. We're all both owners, EPCs, and construction contractors. We're all growing in this together. So I don't expect to have contractors that have completely fully developed AWP playbooks that they're following on every single project they do. However, I do expect during the bid process to receive a submittal of the playbook itself. And sometimes in contracts that I've done this year, I've required that submittal just during the qualification process, just so I can take a look at it. And this is really just making sure that the contractor has an AWP playbook, or in some cases only a work-phase planning playbook. And then the plan would be just to audit against that, whether they're following their own playbook or not on the project. I don't think we're far along enough to really accurately judge the maturity of the playbook. I think that's a couple of years out.
Right. Okay. And Emmer.
Yeah, I fully agree. I don't expect that, the process is new. So I don't expect, like Justin said, that contractors are really fully mature and you have structured processes and best, practices, established well in the companies. We are all still, working on this process. So this is still a process in progress. Now, I cannot add anything, beside the people and the procedures and so on. I will just want to emphasize that you need to see that the contractor has sophisticated systems that to be able to, because you need a lot of information that can be able to handle these. Of course, the experience number one of the people who are involved in the workplace planning, site experience, but these people need to be supported by sophisticated systems that allow them to pull in data from engineering, from procurement, and from their manpower, so they'll be able to make wise, let's say, decisions making process.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll hand it over to the attendees now. If anyone online has a question or a comment for the panelists, you can send it to us via the Q&A feature of the webinar control panel, or you can send it as a direct message, or you can raise your hand and we can pass you the microphone. So you should be able to see all of those buttons in your panel on screen there. We'll just give a minute or two for everyone to think about whether or not they want to chime in. We do have Karen online from Dow with a couple of comments about the Dow approach. Did you want to speak a little bit on that, Karen, or you can just let me know through the through the chat window. While we're just waiting, I'll just mention, well, first of all, I'll just say thank you to everybody who joined us today. And if you're listening to the recording of this after the live webinar, thank you as well for checking it out. We would encourage you to visit awpconference.com or send a message to info@awpconference.com, and you can get all the information that you'll need about the program, the format, the themes, when everything will be happening, how you can register. We encourage you to reserve a half table or a full table at the conference. Bring your team down to Houston and join us for this and other topics. Looking forward to learning a lot more about this one. It's obviously a new concept with a lot of layers of detail, and there's a lot to get into, and you'll have a chance to meet with all of our panelists face-to-face over those 2 days down in Houston. So if there are no other questions or comments right now, I think we'll just close this off. Any closing comments from our panelists?
It's Glen here. One of the things I do remember, I think it was Dr. Hammer Cersei put on or told about is KPIs. I think one of the indications that any owner would be looking at when evaluating a potential partner is the KPIs that they have been following and tracking. And it gives a really good link into what their programs are doing. I'll just give 2 examples. During execution, during construction, one of the really good KPIs that we have found that the owners pay attention to is as the contractor finishes off each IWP is how many deficiencies are associated with that IWP. The program should be trying to get to the point where each IWP is walked down by the foreman and either the general foreman and superintendent so that the deficiencies start tracking down to 0. During detailed design, I'd say one of the key KPIs there is how many times does each EWP get delivered on time complete. Those are 2 examples that I would say if I was evaluating a contractor or a partner on a project, those are 2 that I'd be really looking at.
Perfect. And Justin or Amber, anything you'd like to leave us with before we log off?
No, I just look forward to see everybody in Houston, and invite you all to come if somebody wants to visit Greece. I'm calling from Athens, Greece. So enjoying your summer.
Sure, and I echo that. I'm looking forward to the AWP conference in October. Great.
Yeah, that's something we're finding is this is starting to have much more global reach. So people all around the world are starting to look at it. And yeah, we look forward to meeting you all down in Houston. Again, creating your AWP playbook. It's going to be on the main stage on day 2 of the conference. That's October 3rd from 3 to 4 p.m. And that'll be closing off the conference with that topic with Southern Company, Consolidated Contractors Company, Dow Chemical Company, and facilitated by COAA. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.